Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3.
Hello, Tammy, how are you? Nice to see you.
Welcome to Jerry's Cafe.
We are a destination cafe and we offer craft food and beverages, meaning we make everything fresh on site when you order. And all of our food and our beverages are prepared and served by adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
And then lastly, just say the name. Tom? There you go. Enjoy. My favorite part of working at Jerry's Cafe is definitely interacting with friends I've met throughout the years and the espresso machine.
My co-founder Amy Philpott and I opened Jerry's Cafe for job opportunities. And a staggering statistic tells us that 80% of adults with disabilities are unemployed. I believe differently, and this is the place where our employees can work and feel proud and contribute and can see that they have value and purpose, and they are given the responsibility that anyone would be given in a job. And we expect nothing less than them to perform at their highest level. So we see great success in every single employee and their independence and their offerings and activities here at Jerry's Cafe.
the large, hot, white chocolate pumpkin pie with whipped cream. It is to die for. It is delicious. It's amazing. Well, the favorite part of working here is that I get to serve customers. I am a cashier. They understand to include people with us with exceptionalities.
I wanted to tell you, I've been watching you today. You're really good at your job. You're doing great.
I always like to serve customers. Customers go first.
We are super proud of our partnership with District 214. District 214 has been a supporter from the very beginning of our foundation, and several of the schools have done fundraising and helped us get our doors open to Jerry's Cafe. Proudly, we have 12 or 13 graduates from the District 214 schools who work at Jerry's Cafe as our active employees.
This is where we do our salad prep. This is where we make all the salads. And then over here is the sandwich line. This is where we make all of our sandwiches. I have worked here since day one. I love it here. I love my supportive team members, and I like serving customers. Here is one chicken Mediterranean trip salad.
We know that our community members have lots of choices, but we're hoping that you will come and choose Jerry's Cafe.
Thank you.
When you come inside and engage with our employees, you feel a sense of joy, and you will start your day feeling the best way that you can, with a joyful heart and knowing that Jerry's Cafe has provided you with delicious coffee, breakfast, or lunch.
All right, welcome to our 55th year of putting together an incredible community service project through our SOS class here at John Hersey High School. As you can see around me, it is organized chaos, but it is an incredible day for our students to serve our community by packaging and collecting food that's going to be going to local food pantries in our area to support those in need.
We're really happy to be able to do the food drive here at Hersey because it really just brings the whole school together, and we are able to help our community and bring the energy with everyone here.
Take it out.
For the past, I would say about 2 months, we've been kind of working together with SOS, Junior Leaders, Baseball, and we've all gathered together. We've done bag and tag with 12 different communities, and we've all come together, and it's really amazing to see the turnout. And then later on, we're going to be visiting 8 local food pantries, and it's really exciting. We're just thankful for everyone who's helped each other along the way. It's been really fun.
It's a team effort, but it's been so fun.
Prospect Marching Knights are heading to D.C.
We're in Washington, D.C.
Prospect Marching Knights were invited to travel to Washington, D.C. this year for Veterans Day. So we're taking the band out to our nation's capital. We're going to do some great tours of some of the monuments and the museums and a lot of the sites of D.C. But it all culminates with performances on Veterans Day. So we've been working really hard to prepare, and we're so excited for our students to have this opportunity. Throughout the trip, we had a few opportunities where veterans would actually see our group of students out and about and spoke to our students. So in addition to touring these places, our students were able to actually interact with a number of veterans over the course of the trip, which kind of made everything a little more real and genuine and authentic. So our first day in DC was really impactful and gave our students sort of a big picture overview of the city and some of the history, and really set the stage for our performance day coming up. So on Veterans Day, our morning started off with a performance at the Lincoln Memorial. There we were, right on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, facing the Washington Monument. Just a really special opportunity for our students to have a really great place to perform.
It was an honor to perform on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial with the PMK, where so much of America's history has taken place.
The experience was very impactful for me. It was a unique opportunity that I have never had before, and it was something that I will cherish for the rest of my life.
One of our students, Emily Pollock, was also asked to deliver a speech at the Lincoln Memorial.
I've always wanted to help people, so I'm going to serve my country. more specifically, I want to become an officer in the military.
Her speech was really wonderful and got a really great reception at the event. In fact, after the event was over, I had a number of veterans come track me down to tell me how great her speech was, and actually they wanted to meet her and take pictures with her because they were so moved by what she had to say.
My father served in the Navy, and so he instilled in me the value of serving and caring for our veterans and those who serve us. And so being able to thank them today and place medals around their shoulders and welcome them home was really impactful for me as well.
United States Air Force.
It was an honor to play at the World War II Memorial today. It was such an honor because music is a way to share emotions without using words.
Our performances in DC got a lot of really good responses. One of them, a story was told to me by one of our chaperones, that there was literally a Marine veteran who was at a performance at the Iwo Jima Memorial who was literally in tears watching the performance and just expressed to our chaperone how much it meant to him that this group of teenagers from the Chicago area had come out there and was performing, and he was just really moved by it, and I thought that was just a really neat story to hear coming out of the performance. So any trip like this takes a lot of time and energy to put together. I feel really fortunate that our school was very supportive of this endeavor. We had a bunch of parents who traveled with us and did anything they could to make this a great experience for our students. I'm so glad we were able to bring our students to DC. Veterans Day seemed like a perfect time to bring them, and it really, just in the end, I think the whole trip turned out really, really great, and I'm so happy we were able to make it happen.
Super excited to have the 9/11 Never Forget mobile exhibit here at Hersey High School. As the truck arrived, we had Hersey parents out front with some patriotic balloons. We had Hersey students lining the sidewalks. We had some, mini American flags like they would show on the honor flights. The spirit was high.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to the Stephen Siller Tunnel of Towers mobile exhibit. We have a 50-foot trailer, approximately 1,100 square feet exhibit. We travel our nation to commemorate the brave sacrifice of the firefighters, police officers that gave their life that day in the greatest rescue and recovery effort in our nation's history.
The reason we're here is at Hersey High School to come educate our youth on the happenings of that day, but also the happenings of the days after, and to let them know that it was a huge tragedy. It was the single largest loss of life day we've ever had. It was also the largest rescue we've ever had as well, but just all the good that has come from that tragic day. And they're going to learn things that they can't read about. They're going to hear stories that some have never been told, some have been told many times.
Stephen Siller was one of the 343 firefighters that died that morning. He was getting off duty that morning. He was going to play golf with his older brothers, heard the plane strike, heard on the news that the plane struck the building, turned around, drove back to his firehouse, Squad 1, located in downtown Brooklyn. They had already been dispatched to the disaster. He got his gear, drove his own truck to the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, where he donned 60 pounds of gear, ran 2.5 miles through the tunnel, mustered up with the rest of the firefighters, and gave his life that day, honoring his oath that he took to protect life and property.
So this is about remembering. So we want people to remember, obviously, for adults to remember and for the kids to learn. So we don't want this forgotten. It's not taught in most schools in America. And they have the privilege of talking to people who are there. We can't talk to people who were in the Civil War or these other moments in American history, but they can. And I think that's pretty special. Thanks for having us, and this means more to us than you. This means a lot to these kids, and these kids would be great. They're very respectful. They listen. It's nice to see.
A special thanks, especially to the FDNY crew, to the Siller Foundation, to Soldiers Journey Home, to District 214, to all of Hersey. I'm grateful for everybody. A special shout out to Bill Dustin for the Magic Spirit. Special shout out to Chief Harris, Arlington Heights Police. The coolest part about this project was there's like a whole bunch of people that were on it and did it. It wouldn't have happened without a whole bunch of people. The list is just too long, and to me, that's actually a good thing to celebrate.
This is the Rolling Meadows Band Alumni event, so we decided to get the band back together. This year being the 40th anniversary of the Jazz and Meadows Festival, so it was kind of an opportunity to, hey, can we bring people back at homecoming? I had talked to some of the previous band directors, so that's Len King in the 70s, 80s, early 90s. We have Bill Jastrow and David Boggs from the 90s, and then of course Chris Booty, who retired several years ago. Those people set the foundation for everything that we have here.
I'm giving you a hug if that's okay. Oh my God, look at you. I'd have paid money to be here tonight. I really would have. It's one of those things that I'd pay money to be here. This is the band reunion where your closest friends were really at in high school. And so you're with your closest friends and regrouping after 40-something years and going, holy cow.
Yeah. Mr. King is the reason why I'm here today, not just at the school, but what I do in life. I owe everything to Mr.
Yes.
King. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't have gone to college. And if I hadn't gone to college, who knows what I would be doing.
You know, some of the stuff that we're doing right now is like we never stop doing it, you know, just to be around these guys again and just hanging out. 40 years seems like a long time, but it seems like it's kind of a short time too, you know.
This is fantastic. I mean, I knew it was going to be good, but not this good. 52 of my actual students are in this group. I get a lot of feedback from them telling me how much they enjoyed the music program with me and how they appreciate music now for their life. That's really special because to know that they are still thinking about me and what we did here, it's just very satisfying.
Well, I flew back and I'm glad I did, you know, especially to see Mr. King. He meant a lot to us. He just brought in the jazz and I mean, we had world class, you know, experience that most kids never would have had, you know, a real depth of exposure to great music because of Mr. King, so I'm glad I got to see him.
It's so fun to be back though, I love it. My family's here, they're so excited.
So is my family.
Yeah.
My son's here, my husband's here, so
yeah.
It's really great.
If you are on the fence of coming, whether it's debating about whether to come or not, you should definitely come next time. It feels like a long time ago, but in some ways like you never left. Like I'm like, okay, we're gonna go march over to the stadium and we're gonna play for the football team. So yeah, okay.
Thank you. I'd like to call the workshop meeting to order of Township High School District 214 Board of Education for Thursday, February 27th, 2025. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Dessling.
Here.
Fiorito.
Yes.
Heineman.
Present.
Palmer. Here. Rauch. Here. Walker.
Here.
And Kreutzer.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Would everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
To the flag.
Thank you. Next agenda item is approval of the agenda. Can I have a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Second. There's been a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Fiorito.
Yes.
Heineman.
Aye.
Dessling.
Yes.
Palmer.
Aye.
Rauch. Aye. Walker.
Yes.
And Kreutzer.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0.
Next on the agenda is approval of the open and closed minutes of February 13th, 2025.
So moved. Second.
There's been a motion and a second. Discussion. Please call the roll.
Walker.
Yes.
Fiorito.
Yes.
Dessling. Heineman.
Aye.
Palmer. Aye. Rauch. Aye. And Kreutzer. Aye. Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you. I understand there's no one that has signed up for public comments, so we will move to the roll call items. Approval for a motion and a second for 6-1, please.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion. Please call the roll.
Palmer. Aye. Walker.
Yes.
Dessling.
Yes.
Fiorito.
Yes.
Heineman.
Aye.
Rauch. Aye. And Kreutzer.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0.
Motion and a second for 6-2, please.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion. Please call the roll.
Palmer. Aye. Fiorito.
Yes.
Dessling.
Yes.
Heineman.
Aye.
Rauch. Aye. Walker.
Yes.
Kreutzer.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you. Motion and a second for 6-3, please.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Please
Yeah.
call- Go ahead.
I just wanted to, I noticed on the personal transaction reports that we had a member from the foundation resign, Jessica Seek. And I just wanted to, I know she's not here tonight, but I wanted to go on public record to thank her for everything she's done for the foundation. She was a really good person to work with. I really appreciated all the help she gave me being the representative from the school board, and I wish her the best of luck.
Any other discussion? Please call the roll.
Rauch. Aye. Heineman.
Aye.
Dessling.
Yes.
Fiorito.
Yes.
Palmer. Aye. Walker.
Yes.
Kreutzer.
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0.
A motion and a second for 6-4, please.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion? Please call the roll.
Palmer. Aye. Fiorito.
Yes.
Dessling.
Yes.
Heineman.
Aye.
Rauch. Aye. Walker.
Yes.
And Kreutzer.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you. That's all the action items tonight, and we have one discussion item tonight. 7-1. Dr. Rowe.
All right, thank you. So as this is a workshop meeting, these meetings are designed for us to take a deep dive into an important topic for the district and really wrestle with all aspects of something that we're facing. This is not a new topic for us. Mr. Yulee and Annetta were here, as well as George from Archon were here a little over a year ago to present this initially to us, a facilities maintenance plan that was the first exposure and the first plan of its kind that the district has conducted, which is asking experts from our architects and engineers, as well as construction managers, to collaborate on a deep dive into the district facilities, from air handlers to boilers to athletic fields and tracks to the safety vestibules to the tuck points in the roof and the walls, and how is our buildings, how are our buildings put together? What is the current state of their health? And they resulted in a $852 million project plan of need that we needed to address, should we tackle it all. So in the meantime, we've begun actually chipping away at some of those things, as Ms. Mitzak and Mr. Yulee have put together and have that in motion. Hershey's Student Services this year, as well as the roofs and the air conditioning at Wheeling that we tackled last year and a little bit more this year. So all those things are in motion. But at the same time, we have quite a lot to still tackle. So this evening's plan is for us to, actually I get to be in charge here. So the plan is to take that review as well as discuss what options do we have. We don't have $852 million. No school district does. But what are the options that we have to understand what financing may be available to us to consider? From fund balance to bond issuance to life safety bonds and to the ultimate referendum that, of course, we avoid, and this district has avoided for 52 years. But we have to wrangle with all those financing options if we're going to tackle this project. And then, of course, this board has been recognized for more than a decade of being outstanding financial stewards of the taxpayers' money, and it's not something that I take lightly, and I know my team doesn't take it lightly. We are actively underway of not only becoming more efficient with how we do our work, but pushing those dollars as far as we possibly can out of respect to the community, because those dollars are not ours, and we know that. So all of that encompassing will be in the conversation tonight, and we'll have the opportunity to really wrangle with George from Archon and ask questions about the facility plan. And then Tammy and Tim from PMA will present and share what those funding options are, and we can ask questions with them about, just to really ensure that the entire board understands all aspects of it is really our purpose. And then we'll have a discussion amongst ourselves about where we'd like to go and what options really exist. So as we walk into that, you have not seen the final version of the strategic plan yet, but I wanted to connect the work to what that will be. And this is still in draft form. It's certainly not a finished product, but I point your attention to goal number 4, and 4A is reimagining quality facilities. And even since then, we've switched back to reimagining premier facilities, because we believe that's what our students and staff and community deserve. But this work, this discussion tonight, is directly tied with the strategic planning work that we'll be doing for the next 5 years under this plan. And then as you're presented with a 10-year master facilities plan, the renewal of this plan for 5 years after that. So it's not something that we really will ever venture away from, as our demands of society on instruction and what our students need will continually evolve, and it's our responsibility to update our buildings, shift our buildings, and make them more flexible so that they can meet the needs of our students in a classroom that prepares them for a world that's kind of unknown at this point. So this Wordle, not Wordle, but Wordle, encapsulates some of the feedback we receive from families. And as these word clouds work, the larger the word, the more frequent it was mentioned when we did the surveying with families in our surveys leading into the strategic plan. And you may remember for one of the very first presentations that Deliver Ed Partners gave us, they gave us 2 charts, and one of the charts was strengths of the district, and on the other side was opportunities for improvement. And facilities lived on both sides of that. Our families recognized that we have tremendous facilities to support student needs. Our CTE facilities are out of this world, second to none. We have all the athletic facilities that our students could dream of. They need to be updated, but we have them. Our buildings are aging. Buffalo Grove is our youngest at 52 years old. But if you walk through our buildings, our custodial maintenance team does such a wonderful job that on the outside and as you engage with it, they look like they're really wonderful buildings, and they are. Tonight's focus is on the behind the walls and some of the areas that we don't see. And we're not built to see because we're not experts in this field. But on the opportunity side are the facilities that really addresses those things. You remember last year we had to close Buffalo Grove because of an air conditioning issue. The year before we had to close Buffalo Grove for a day because of an air conditioning issue. We almost had to close Buffalo Grove. It's not just a Buffalo Grove problem, but we almost had to close Buffalo Grove this year because we were minutes away from a water main break that our CMA guys averted. Hersey is currently under renovation, and our students advisory, you'll remember, said it's time to update our classrooms. We need this. So this conversation is not new. It's happening in our classrooms. It's happening with our staff. It's happening in our communities. And now it's at our table for us to wrestle with and decide how we want to move forward. So it's really an opportunity for us to put a really positive renewal and reimagining what we'd like our schools to be that our community is so proud of and our students are just so deserving of the best that we can give them. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to George and let George take point and update us on an updated version and refresh you with the master facilities plan.
Perfect. Can everyone hear me? Thank you, Dr. Rowe. I'm happy to be here again a year later to be able to talk through these tonight. And I do talk fast sometimes because I get excited about these things. So if at any point Pause me, and I'll slow down, okay? I'm at that stage where I need readers, but I don't want to admit it yet, so I will be holding things a little further away from me than I normally would. But again, so tonight, as we walk through this long-range facility plan, it's a little bit of a refresher course from last year, but I want to spend some time kind of reiterating and re-explaining kind of what our challenge was, what we looked at, how we looked at it, and then kind of walk through some of the things that we found once again. As we were kind of brought on board to look at this from a long-range perspective, our big primary focus on the long-range facility plan was looking at your existing assets and helping be proactive of creating a maintenance plan from all your buildings. In one way of looking at it, I always say it's like taking one of your schools, I'll say BG, because we've been saying BG, flipping it upside down and shaking it. And everything that falls out of it is the things that we didn't look for. Anything that's still in there intact is the stuff that we looked at. So it turns into anything that's loose. Furniture, books, you name it, equipment that is not kind of tied to the building are things that we didn't approach. It was the stuff that was permanent to the building that keeps them going. From a simple perspective, it's like looking at your house. When you get your house and you move in, yes, everything looks perfect as it is day one of you moving in, but you know that there's maintenance that has to happen to the house to keep going. Roof maintenance, wall maintenance, plumbing maintenance, all things that if you forget and you neglect, it builds up to a big issue down the road. So the smart decisions you guys made was to look at us and say, can you look at all your buildings, figure out all the key components that make these buildings tick, how do we make them safe, how do we make them dry, and making sure that no water's entering the buildings, we're keeping the roofs good, the walls and the windows working properly, and then getting proactive to say, how do we put a plan together to know what's that expected life cycle for all these components so we can continuously plan for them rather than be surprised by them, right? What the study wasn't, so the study is looking at all your spaces and making sure that we maintain them. It wasn't an analysis to see any sort of opportunities from a change in curriculum. Are there things that you're trying to do in your facilities that you haven't been able to do? Are there spaces that we want to look at to expand upon? It was really looking at what you have and maintaining what you have, right? Okay? So a couple key things. It's the stuff that no one sees. These are the glamour shots that you'd see that we as architects and engineers look at, but the average student or community member doesn't get to see. It's the things that keep the building conditioned, power coming to the buildings, the roofs that are keeping the buildings dry, and really all the kind of key infrastructure from a plumbing perspective, all the guts of the building that are vintage of the same era when it was built, right? So here's a snapshot of the types of things we looked at, and it wasn't just me walking, because that would have taken a really long time. We had a full team of people that did this, a bunch of members from Archon on the architecture side. We had INSPEC, which is your building envelope. Roofers at the time were looking at all your roofs and walls. We had CS2 engineering that was looking at all your mechanical, electrical, and plumbing and fire protection components. And then we had Pepper Construction looking at all those from a lens from a contractor and a cost perspective. So we put all those experts in a room. We spent all these hours walking, identifying, cataloging. We regrouped with administration to report out the types of things we found, incorporate anything that we might have been missing, met with buildings and grounds folk. We identified all the components, and then we started putting budgets to all these. And that's where that big dollar number that you saw was. It was identifying every single component and budgets. The heart attack when you see that is, oh my God, that's a big number. But the key thing that we got to look at is we wanted to make sure that we identified every component. Doesn't mean every component needs to get done. It's just every component that makes these buildings tick, so they're all on our radar. Now, some of them are newer, some of them are older, some of them are in the middle of their life. So all these things are identified from day one. Budgets are identified from day one. And then the big part is to plan how do you project out over years to help prioritize the types of things that you might need to do. There's a number of items on this list that are going to be well beyond the 10 years, right? There's a couple of these items that are probably screaming for us to get to earlier. But again, this was us to give you the best foot forward to understand all the different components for all your facilities and the types of things to keep them properly maintained. I'll snap. So what we did on a big picture level, and what you're going to see tonight, is really breaking things down into 5 different categories. And these are kind of the high-level approaches that make it easy to categorize things for discussion purposes. And if you follow along, I don't know what page it is, but it's what's up on slide. The first one I'm going to talk about is the site. So as we looked at the site, we walked all your properties to look at your existing pavement, your sidewalks, your fields, your competition fields, your outdoor bleachers, your storage facilities, and perimeter fencing. And we grouped them into categories, and we started seeing, okay, here's the types of things that you will want to make sure you're staying on. For example, paving, your parking lots. Parking lots might look great. If you start looking at cracks in them, yes, those are patched. You got to get a maintenance plan to do crack fill and seal coating. But at a certain point, they're going to start looking like alligator skin. When you start seeing alligator skin, that's when you know that it's failing underneath that surface. And it can't be just a skim coat on top. It's when you start to have to grind down multiple inches of the binder layer and repave. So we know that's part of a maintenance plan. And in day one, it might look great, but within the next 10, 20 years, you are going to have to do that. So we made sure we identified ways to crack, fill, and seal coat. We identified ways to replace, and we put those in there as different cost estimates to make sure they stay on your radar. Looking at your fields, we have a lot of turf fields. Turf was installed right after I left Hershey is when it came, so I get to miss it. But those turfs came, and that means it's a vintage of a good number of years ago, right? And if you look at that, an average turf field is a 10 to 12-year cycle. Some of these are coming on 14 or 15 years. They're getting properly maintained and taken care of, but they're going to get to a point where we need to replace them. So again, you would touch those, but then 15 years from now, you're going to have to touch those again. So making sure that we identify all those components, make sure we're looking at how to replace, how do we make things accessible, looking at all your sites equally to make sure that we could put a maintenance plan on all those areas. If you keep going down the line, LED lighting on the exterior, perimeter fencing, making sure they're updated. Looking at your existing concessions and storage facilities and making sure they're working properly and maintained. And then wayfinding signage on certain areas. So we identified all the main components that are circling your properties and making sure that we put a proper plan together and identify dollar values to them. And what you see on the right is kind of a green light, yellow light, red light approach. And the green light is kind of saying that in general, we are in great condition. The yellow light is saying those are the types of things you want to monitor. They might hit you in the next 5 to 10 years of things that you might want to tackle. The red light ones are more of the ones that might be areas that you want to address sooner. I got ahead of myself. Encompassed in all these is also life safety type items. So if there's trip hazards on the site, if there's areas that are not accessible, those types of components we wanted to address. We know your life safety survey is up in 2026. Coming up. We've encompassed the types of items that we would put in that already into this template, so by the time we get to that life safety adoption or submission, we have those components here that would be part of that cycle. So there are a number of life safety type items that are on this. If we go to the next one, we look at architectural. So the architectural side of things is us focusing on anything inside the building from a finishes perspective. That's looking at flooring. It's looking at ceilings. It's looking at your doors and hardware going into your classrooms, making sure that we have the proper ADA hardware for every door that's a lever versus a knob. We're looking at glazing, making sure that things are replaced. We have a number of areas. We have fire-rated glazing, wired glass, switching things to tempered glass. These are the code type things that we would do from a life safety perspective. But a lot of the architectural side of things is really a refresh to all the existing spaces that you have in your buildings. What this does, it pretty much has a painting plan in there for all your classrooms. A casework maintenance plan, we're replacing your cabinets in all your classrooms over time for all the aged areas. Your science casework, your flooring, your ceilings, your lights, a number of, actually the technology and electrical components go on the electrical side. Finishes in the bathrooms, looking at all those from a tiling perspective and from a fixture perspective. All those types of things are happening in the architectural side of things at every one of your sites. If we're looking at the theaters, replacing seating finishes in all your theaters, your gym floors, your interior bleachers, everything that is a component of the architectural side that's in your building that would need maintenance is encapsulated in these dollars, right? So like I said, a lot of these items are items that we would see in the building. On the right, you're seeing that the kind of the color-coded diagramming of things that we are monitoring, things that are in good condition, and things that might trigger us to address earlier on. So the yellows, it doesn't mean that if it shows yellow, that everything is yellow in that component. It's just the majority of things are doing great. There might be a couple onesie, twosie types things that might be wanting to get done earlier than later. Building envelope. So this is the one that I always kind of talk about, that's the vertical and horizontal components of your buildings. So the building envelope is keeping the water out of your inside. It's looking at your roofs, the horizontal components, making sure that we're staying watertight in that front, and then we're looking also on the vertical fronts. All your walls, your windows, your tuck pointing, all the types of components where anywhere water can get in is building envelope, trying to keep it out. So as we look at that on preventive maintenance side, we are looking at all your different vintages of roofs. I mean, in all your schools, not every roof was done at the same time. They're all in different eras of additions and different times that they were replaced. So understanding when each one was done, what their expected life cycle is, helped us kind of identify the types of maintenance you would need to do on it. Depending on the roof type, it might have a 15-year life cycle, it might have a 25-year life cycle. It doesn't mean that in 25 years you have to do a replacement. All it means is, as we approach that 25-year mark, are the types where you want to get more eyes on things to make sure it's going great. You might do some small maintenance, and it breathes another 10 years life to it, right? And that's why I look at this from a maintenance perspective and on a roof side. If they're not giving you problems, we go by the life cycle. If they are giving you problems, we are raising those to the top of the priority list, right? And those are the types of things that we've identified. We want to make sure every component is listed and everyone has a dollar value to it, because as certain things might get kicked down the road, certain things might want to get brought forward. We want to make sure that we don't drop anything of those off the radar. The windows. There's a number of facilities that have single pane windows. Those are probably pretty much an energy thing, where that single pane is not insulated. It makes it tougher for your building's mechanical systems to work harder to keep the weather out or keep the weather in, depending on the time of season, right? And that switching to a double pane insulated glass helps astronomically for those parts. So we've identified the windows that are single pane throughout the buildings to help kind of do those replacements. Wall maintenance, it's pretty self-explanatory on the tuck pointing, looking at your control joints. Over time, caulk and sealant kind of degrades and crumbles. So looking at making sure that we replace, making sure those are fluid as they go back on, allow the movement of your buildings to happen without letting the sealant crack and let water penetrate your building. So it's looking at it from that perspective, from an expansion joint perspective. And then looking at all your exterior doors, making sure that thresholds are maintained, that the doors are doing what they need to do, they're not letting water in, they're sealing correctly, they're safe and they're secure around your buildings, that we're keeping everything out and they're not giving you issues as you open and close them. Okay? Mechanical. When we looked at, we pretty much identified every single component of your buildings that provided heating and cooling everywhere in them. So be it a rooftop unit, be it radiant heat throughout, be it the vestibule radiant heat, be it ceiling units that are VAV boxes, you name it, every single type of component that provides heating and cooling was identified. Every piece of equipment was identified from a catalog perspective, so we know exactly what all those pieces are. We have exact when they were installed, their expected life cycle, and all those were used to help identify cost, replacement, and expected life cycle for each one of those components. I think I forgot to mention boilers and pumps inside the buildings and chillers as well. So every component to the building on the mechanical side was identified and cataloged and quantified from a dollar perspective. And again, as we're going through this, what we've done is we've identified every building, and at the bottom is kind of shows each building's kind of general cost, and then collectively what those dollars are. Plumbing. Plumbing side of things, we looked at not only the end product of the spaces you're at, be it the ADA accessible toilets, the fixtures themselves, your sinks, your drinking fountains, but also all the piping that leads to all those spaces. So looking at your supply piping to the building throughout the hallways to the spaces that they're at, making sure that we looked at fire protection to see where are areas that aren't sprinklered, where are they sprinkled, if the fire pump has the right capacity, if we were to fully sprinkle the buildings. So it was identifying all the plumbing components and making sure that we have them listed on here for maintenance. Your BAS systems, your building automation systems, I said drinking fountains, right? Thermostatic mixing valves. The controls on those, making sure that we're providing the right temperature to the spaces that they are supporting, right? So those thermostatic mixing valves help us control the heat at the end user location when they're washing their hands. And the reason I mention that, because we always talk life safety. And life safety and code compliance in general is reflective of when your buildings were built. So we always test your code compliance to when your buildings were built. The only department that went rogue on that is plumbing. Plumbing, it's current code. So if everything else is done by the code of when you were built, plumbing is, we go by today's code, right? And that is something that we've had to follow along. So as things have evolved from the temperatures to dead ends that have occurred that people called, where if there was a dead end pipe, it used to be 40 or 50 feet, where water would not be going anywhere, they didn't mind. Now that's been minimized down to 5 feet. Years ago, there was an incident that spread a little bit of Legionnaire's disease that was caused by a dead end, and because of it, the rules changed. So now, because of that, we've been looking at plumbing at a very different lens to make sure that we don't have any dead end areas in your buildings that would cause too much flow of water being stagnant. So those types of things have kind of alerted us on the plumbing side that have been upgraded to today's code, so we have all those identified on here. The last piece was electrical. So electrical was looking at all your systems in your buildings and how they're functioning for the types of things you're trying to do in them. And like anything, when buildings were built, the power requirements leading to them were from the era of that time. But since then, the amount of things that we've been doing in these classrooms, the amount of power consumption that we've needed has grown and evolved. So making sure that, your building is getting the right amount of power to them, so looking at your service and your switch gears, and then also looking at the types of energy you're consuming and looking at LED lighting, things to be more energy conscious and do replacement in all your spaces. And looking at power from an outlet perspective to every one of your classrooms. Then looking at your fire alarm, making sure we upgrade the front end as well as all the devices throughout your buildings, making sure we have that identified. And then the potential of looking at the generators, the backup power to all your facilities. So in a nutshell, those were the 5 categories that 6, I am really good at math, but right there, 6 categories that we really identified as the big picture. The facility assessment goes into much deeper dive in each one of those components, but from a generalization, those are the lenses that we looked at and the types of components that we put in these dollars. And what you're seeing here is kind of a breakdown of all the components, and then you kind of could see as you spread all the way to the right side how much they make up of the overall picture. In the lower pieces, the building envelope, the things that keep your building dry, the mechanical, plumbing, and electrical, all the components that just keep the buildings going, make up a good over like about $460 million of that number. The architectural and site make up the rest, and those become the finishes of the interiors and a number of life safety type items. But you could see kind of how that kind of breakdown is, and we thought this would be a good diagram to share to kind of show you where those things stand. And if you have questions about what breaks up each component based on buildings, you can pretty easily see it right on the paper. So I said a lot. So big picture, once again, the facility report was all those different components that I identified. The costs associated are base today's costs of what those can be. And I am going to say one more thing. I'm going to go back to it. Remind me. But the key is looking at today's dollars. If you plan out and you project out over years, that next step as you look at those, we would put escalation as you project things out into each year, 4 to 5%, basing on how we look at things, to make sure that we capture it correctly, the correct dollars in the correct year. So that 866, if we did everything today, if we had to do everything today, that's what it would be. It doesn't mean that that's going to be the same number 5, 10 years from now. And the reason I say that is At the beginning of this, Dr. Rowe had mentioned $852 million worth of items. That was from a year ago. As you can see, things that are still on there, it's starting to grow, and those dollars kind of go up with it, right? So if you're wondering why is there a difference in number, that isn't math wrong. That is the facts of Excel working for me to tell me what it should be. But yeah, questions? Yes?
Okay, I have several. The things that you have up there, have any of them been updated for things that projects we've done in the last year or two? And I'll give you a great example would be Wheeling. We replaced the track, we replaced the turf field, but yet you still showed their field conditions as a yellow. And I'm assuming you're saying that because you're taking into consideration all the fields and just not the football field. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Next one I had was you put preventative maintenance as yellow, and that concerns me.
True. Okay.
I mean, I would think that preventive maintenance should always be in the green because you would always be looking to making sure that you are maintaining your buildings, and saying yellow to me says that maybe we're not.
Well, the preventive maintenance side of things, and great point. If it says it's green, that means you don't have to worry about it. That means you're just doing great. Preventive maintenance is keeping an eye on it. So every year, you're always going to want to keep an eye on that to see if what type of preventive maintenance needs to happen. It could be there's leaves in the gutters that are causing drain issues, or hey, in this area, the ballasted roof started to come off. That didn't happen last year. So I leave it as yellow because that's something you always want to monitor. And that's kind of what that yellow signifies, monitor condition. So every year, our building envelope, our director of building envelope, Brian, would want to come and continuously look at your buildings to make sure that here's a list of things to keep going, and that'll breathe more years out of this roof. And it's usually the small amounts. It could be $1,000 here, $1,000 there. It's all relative when we talk about these things. But in general, those are the types of things that are identified on a yearly basis to keep these things going. So I always want to keep that as yellow to be monitored.
Okay. I have one more question. I have a couple more questions, but I'll just ask one more and let my fellow board members partake in their questions. Forest View, it's our kind of our newest building with all this stuff, and I just expected to see more green than yellow and red.
Yes. So the reason that if you're looking at Forest View, like here, it's mostly green with a little bit of yellows, and that is, when the big picture on a site, I always kind of call parking lots and maintenance is always going to have to happen. So hence the yellow is every few years you're going to have to do it. It's not something that you're going to live with for 5-10 years without doing anything to it. So if there's more of a shorter time frame of maintenance type items, even if it's smaller items, crack fill and seal coating is a really small item that dollar-wise that you would do to keep the parking lots going. Those are identified in here, so I put those as kind of things that you would have to kind of keep doing.
Okay.
I would also add, Mr. Fioretto, that C building hasn't been touched in any upgrade in this building where community ed lives.
Okay.
And it's in need of some attention too, but that's probably contributing to that yellow.
Okay. I'll yield.
Board members, more questions? Go ahead.
So you talk about how future dollars impact this, but one of the things I'm got noodling around in my head is when you go to do an actual project, you start looking at the components to that project and things tend to mushroom. So for example, if we were looking at replacing exterior doors because there were leaks, we'd start saying things like, well, now's a good time to ask how secure are our buildings and how safe are they from intruders or et cetera, and that project, which might have been a door replacement, suddenly can take on a new life, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the things I think about a lot is when we're educating our students, we're educating them with the world we know now. And they're going to work at jobs using technology that hasn't even been invented yet. So how do we, when we talk about the interior spaces in our buildings, how do you even tackle that? How do you get because some projects like the doors, you could kind of get your arms around, right? But there's things we don't know about. We don't know, like 30 years ago, no one would have said, gosh, we're going to need good Wi-Fi in all these buildings. What do we do about that? How do you even approach that?
You know, it's interesting. So I'm gonna make a short answer really long, so I apologize in advance. So I'm gonna tackle this on two fronts. One, when we talk about facilities on the maintenance side, a lot of times we are looking at the components that keep the buildings going, keeping your existing assets going, moving forward, right? The other side of that component is a different challenge. It's us looking at how are the educational environments working for you and where do you want them to go? And when we take that task on, that exercise we do is we meet with students, we meet with staff, we meet with administrators, we meet with community members to start understanding how the facilities are working for the needs that they have and the types of things that might be coming forward. That future-proof question of the types of educational opportunities you'd like to have. And that, when we look at that lens, a lot of that is tied to curriculum, it's tied to opportunity for education purposes, and it's tied to professional development and the types of things that are coming out and coming into the future to educate everyone on to see if those are the types of things that make sense here. And as we deep dive on that, we look at, all right, here's the types of opportunities that are there, here's that gap that there might be, or the areas that you guys are flourishing in, you're saying you're way ahead of the game on it, and us coming back with a challenge of saying, here's ways you could tackle to create those spaces in your buildings. So when we take that challenge on, we usually look at, we call that a master plan just from a design, from an educational side. We marry those two together, and it helps you identify things that you need to do to maintain, and things that will help drive those spaces forward, and you put that together as one comprehensive look. The reason I say that is sometimes you don't want to fix something and then suddenly you realize you need it for something totally different and now you're gonna go backwards, right? So that's from an educational lens, from looking at the future side. The second piece is when we look at all these components from a flexibility standpoint. A lot of people started using terms. I want things as flexible as possible. You know, all the buzzwords that started coming out, but what did that really mean? As time has gone on, what we've been doing is in opportunities where we're taking down ceilings and coming back with new ceilings and lights and finishes in the space floor walls of the room, trying to pipe empty conduit, pipe as many things behind the walls as possible so that we could try to capture things that might come in the future. Same thing goes for furniture. Less built in and more loose to allow that evolution to happen, because everything that was built in and so permanent has been giving us challenges as we go down as we're trying to renovate those spaces. Like now there's cabinets that you're using less of. There's things there's chalkboards that were on walls that you don't really use anymore. So limiting the things that are permanent and helps give you guys more opportunity to evolve over time and be ahead of it rather than tearing things apart. It's really replacing, it becomes a furniture exercise a lot of the times. And then space, just making sure that your rooms have enough space for people to be able to kind of move around. That's kind of helping us outfit these rooms to be a way that 10, 20, 30 years from now, you're not going as far backwards to make something and change something that's permanent. It's giving them the opportunities to be as loose and open as possible.
So when you look at the study you guys did, I appreciate the response, but when you look at the study that you did, which is very comprehensive and very helpful, I don't see factored in things like the furniture and the things you can shake out of the building, right? And so, or the design process associated with those spaces, et cetera. So when I look at that 866, I know it's light, which is a shocking thing to say, because it'll grow over time as the cost of things go up, but it's also missing components that will come out of it.
Well, I will tell you this, valid. That is true. There are components that aren't captured in this that is something, and I think that's part of the conversation today. If there's other lenses we want to make sure we capture, we want to make sure we're good on that front as we make any sort of educated step going forward, correct? But when it comes to the design in the spaces and the dollars that are associated to them, this came up last time, and I remember, and a lot of times when we build these numbers and create these numbers, there's a couple contingencies that are built into this, and one of them is called a design contingency. And as I think Frank might have asked me it last time about what that means. And in a nutshell, the easiest way of answering that one is if you have a rooftop unit, this is mechanical, a rooftop unit that you want to replace. And right now there's $1 associated to it. When the time comes and that unit wants to come, that's when we're going to design it. By then that unit might be bigger, it might be smaller, it might be lighter, it might be heavier. We don't know that, right? There might be steel that you need to reinforce just to carry the weight of that thing, or there might be holes that are on the bottom of that are different than what's there on the roof right now. So that design contingency is capturing those dollars to make sure it gives us that flexibility. When that day comes and we design it, we know that's going to happen. The same thing goes for every component in this. If in the classrooms we have cabinetry, we have flooring, we have ceilings, we have lights, all those have contingencies built into them to allow some of that growth to absorb anything that will come from a design perspective for those spaces. What it won't absorb is if we suddenly wanted to change these rooms and grow them and expand them or do something different. It's absorbing things within the scope of the realm of what we can guess right now, right? So that factor is in every component of every category listed here, and that helps kind of safeguard some of that design work that will happen when that time comes. But a lot of these components that are listed here are pretty clear components. They aren't looking at the spaces from converting them into something that they're not. They're looking at them as almost as a one-for-one, but an upgrade to everything that's there in your existing facility. So as we go forward, if we want to start looking at that other lens, that is something that we've done many a time for a lot of our clients, and could be something that we rope into this as well to give you a fully versed, comprehensive outlook to it that could help.
And Millie, I would actually add to what George is saying, that just to bring in this in the conversations we're having, you know, Chris and Annetta and I have had some discussions, and what they're planning on addresses some of your point, because when we start making all of these improvements, the attention is going to go, what about the classroom? I want to feel and see this when so much of this is behind the walls, and we don't want to lose that excitement, because then people get frustrated with how much money we'd be spending on something they can't see. So
That's right.
It's in motion that we can control and just chip away as we can, is that classroom furniture and infusing that flexibility. And they're working on kind of the vision is a district standard of a few different options that allows for flexibility. And it's not the one-arm bandit style desk and a desk and row, but it's more collaborative style seating. And when we have a few options, we can set up some classrooms that our teachers can come try out and decide what they like, and then say, I want that style, I want this style, or I want this style. And we can then control if we're down to just a few designs, and we commit to a certain amount of money annually, we can get a really great price on those few designs, and our money can go further. And then we can meet both worlds and take care of some of the mechanical and take care of some of the exciting along the way.
Well, and I also like that from a lens of equity, right? I think that if you walk into a science classroom in any of our high schools, they should all be up to the same amount of, the facilities should be the same. They should have the same types of, so we're going to have a nano lab at Wheeling and we're not going to have it other places, but I'm talking your basic science lab should have the same functionality throughout. And the idea of modular seating that's at the same level throughout would also be good for our students to feel like they're not at the old rundown school.
And I would tell you, the
schools.
science labs are on here as really the only classroom, because they do need to be updated. They are original to the building, and those are the super thick, heavy style tabletops that can handle the chemicals if they spilled. That needs to become more flexible, so our teachers have the flexibility of teaching and doing labs in the same space and not being constrained like they are now, because they're all fixed. They're fixed structures in the floor and attached to the side countertops.
Thank you.
And I will tell you, I mean, right now, the guts are there in every one of these spaces. The refresh that's listed on here on the architectural side is pretty much upgrading all those finishes to that same level of today's standards. So that works out pretty well.
Board members?
Yeah.
go ahead. Mr. Dustling, go ahead.
Me? Okay. I've just spent 46 minutes drinking out of a fire hose. That's a tremendous amount of information, very appreciated, but that's a lot of information. My focus is safety and security, always, for the staff and the students. But as I look at this, I'm trying to figure out how much of the pie do I want to eat at once? You know, how big a chunk do I want to take out, and how long can I chew on it before I have to swallow it? And that gets into money. And that's the next thing I'm going to be interested in, and see what that is. But obviously, you know, you look at the red and you say, we got to do something. We got to get that done. I'm not sure of the time frames. I'm not sure of the total amount of money when you add it up for the red. But it's safety and security, but this is a tremendous amount of information to get. And then, once we decide where we're at, maybe with the dollars or whatever it is, or get an idea about what we got to do, then it comes down to our staff. What does the staff recommend? What do we put out for bids? When? How do we do that? What schools? A tremendous thing that we have to look at. But right now, I appreciate the information. It's just a tremendous amount of information to try to understand and get your head around. Thank you.
George, thanks for all the information. I guess if I look at it, it's really a generational change here, right? It's 60 years that we've upgraded but never really tackled it in whole, right? This, in my opinion at least, this is a comprehensive plan that puts us on track for future so that we don't run into this 60 years from now, right? Is that a safe assumption? Okay.
And that might be the greatest outcome of this whole thing is we'll be able to, now that we have this, and once we update so many aspects of it, you know, our team will now have a playbook, and it can look 10, 15, 20 years out, from parking lots to roofs to carpet to just the preventative maintenance schedule, and then we can budget more intelligently so that it's not a guessing game of I think I need this much this year. No, I know exactly how much I need because this is coming due, this is coming due, this is coming due. I have to replace 75 classrooms in carpet, and this is how much it costs because it's all part of a laid out plan. And you don't see an $860 million project again. You see 15 to 30 million a year that we can actively budget for to maintain our buildings. And then a special project comes up, and we're not trying to play catch up. So we end up on a tremendously strong footing on the other side of this. The tough part that we're faced with is how do we get to the part where we can start looking on the other side of this and plan for the future so that we don't ever feel like we're behind again. There's nothing wrong with being where we are. We are where we are. This is the first time we've done a deep dive in an assessment like this, and now we have the information to be armed with exactly how we can attack it and our students and staff and community what they deserve.
Right. So maybe another way to look at it, and again, I'm a very simple guy, as you guys know.
Oh, yeah. You keep saying that, kid.
There's two things that pop in my head all the time, right? Grandview Homes and Jeff buys houses. If you don't keep the upgrade of your house going, the value goes down. So when you look at whatever this is, 862 million, or 866, sorry, what are the buildings worth? And if we don't do that, what happens? I think that's the thing we have to look at as well. We have to protect the investment, because the investment first starts with the safety and the security of the kids, and then the buildings. You know, it's not good stewardship not to take care of buildings, and when we get into a position like this, we have to develop a plan, right? So it is drinking out of a fire hose, no doubt, and there is a lot to consider. You know, anything with 3 commas in it is a lot. But I think we have to keep open minds and really look at how we're going to eat the pie one bite at a time and figure this out. But it's going to be a marathon. It's not going to be a sprint with this.
I will tell you this, so the fun stuff I get to do at night is try to play with these numbers and see when you can do things and how often you can do, because there's a lot of different components to this, not just the dollars, but how to achieve it over time, because it's not like you can do $80 million in the summer. you have buildings to maintain, you have programs that keep happening, you have summers, how far into a year or outside of a year can you go to get things done? So it's analyzing from a lot of different lenses to see what you can do. What you have here is a good starting point to identify the types of things that you can do. You won't be able to do them all, and it's okay, and I don't think you need to do them all. I think a lot of these things could push off into the years, many years down the road, but at least it gives you a starting point with, you're not forgetting anything, everything's in front of you. Now you marry it with the types of things that you can do, and see what you do, go from there. So this tool isn't intended to terrify, it's not intended to tell you you have to do everything. It's intended to give you every single piece of the puzzle that makes your buildings tick and help inform you of the types of things that you might have to do. There's items in here that might say you don't have to touch them for 15, 20 years, but suddenly that component is becoming an issue now. At least it's identified, you bring it forward, you can get it done, you might have to push something else back. It's just there to help you make educated moves as you go forward. So I wasn't here, the whole point of this isn't to tell you, there's your dollar, do it. It's to, here's every component that you might need to do at time.
Yeah, and I think, one last statement I would make is, we have a great crew that's behind us, but the brain trust that comes with this now takes high hire just like we take our students. So I think we owe that to the staff to really take a look at this and how are we going to go forward and make them better and give them the opportunity to grow too. We got this far. Now we have to take an elevator for a little bit maybe, but thank you, George. I appreciate all the help.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Quite informative and educational. You mentioned that the life safety decisions, they go according to the age of the building, except plumbing. Is that correct?
Correct.
How does the fire alarm upgrade system work? So that doesn't come up to current code? That would go according to the age of the building?
Fire alarm, as you touch it, once you touch it, you have to upgrade it. And a lot of these components that are devices in the buildings that have been living, as you kind of look at it, once you start touching it, it ends up steamrolling into the current standards of what it needs to be. And in here, we have identified your head end and the devices throughout your building to get replaced, because we know you want to do that. So the dollars are associated in here as planned.
Okay. I am curious, is there a trend or a pattern? Because as I'm looking at some of the numbers based on school, is it fair to say that age of the building probably plays more of a role than the size of the building as far as repairs?
Yes, yeah, that's fair. Mechanically, pretty much every component of your building that's mechanical has a 25 to 35 year life. At every building, there's a good amount of items that were pre-2000 and a good amount of items that were post-2000. So they all have different vintages, but the age of them when they're installed is really what drives if it becomes something that is needed earlier than later.
Okay.
We did identify them, we started with age, and then we asked components that are giving you problems. The good news is, you guys have been maintaining your buildings great. None of these items are things that are emergencies. It's just items based on age that you might want to do. My roof in my house, it has a 15-year life, but it's 25 years old. It's going. Now, what's weird is if you replace it now, when it says 15 years, it gives you 12, right? So it used to be it gives you 15 and you get down to 30 and you're good. So things have been changing on every finish and every component of buildings, but you guys have the ones that are the vintage that last longer, so.
I have two more questions. Do we have a breakdown on what all the red costs us versus, I can see a breakdown of total red, total yellow, total green. So for instance, if in my...
Breakdown by color.
Breakdown by color.
That would be, I could bring that back to you. I wouldn't do it strictly off of this, because as you can see, there's areas that are broken in yellow. And I went out for a second. It could be that in, let's say, Hersey's site, there's a lot of components that need to happen, more than components that don't need to happen, so it graduated to a red level. It doesn't mean that dollar is going to signify everything that needs to happen in red. So I can circle back and give you guys some of those items to kind of reflect on.
We can discuss that.
The yellow is monitor condition. It doesn't mean anything needs to be replaced today. So.
Okay, all right. And I'm going to ask a really far-fetched question. So if we were to build one of these buildings from scratch, what does that cost today? Just to put in perspective, one building.
Your buildings are what, 400,000 to 500,000 square feet? Ironically, I was having this conversation the other day, and when I started this career 20 years ago, it cost about $250 a square foot to do something, to build something. By 2019, it costs $350 a square foot. In 2025, it costs $800 a square foot. So depending on what year you're looking at, if it's only going to go up every 4 or 5%. So you're talking $800 a square foot times 400, so in the 300 million range, minimum 350 to do something like that.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
That was my shock value of
Yeah, that was like, oh my gosh. Thank you. Well, Andrea kind of touched on it, you know, what costs red, what costs yellow, what costs green. I'm more looking like a rating system. What's number one, what's emergency now, what number two, like a rating system, 1 to 5. We had that years ago in a big spreadsheet that we used to get, and it was really helpful for the board members, and I kind of hope we go back to that, but I know this is what we're talking about at hand. And then, of course, you do have the rating system, but then an emergency comes up. Mm-hmm. You know, say you're going to put 50 million into reds, you know, ones, but then, something happened over here, and now you have to take care of that. So there's always that going on. And, but you didn't talk about how much of this is life safety. You know, and they've been doing life safety for years in the state. You know, the life safety, which is a 10-year plan that you have to submit to the state, and you have to do it within 10 years. Yeah. So some of this could be life safety, yes?
Correct.
But you won't know that till next year.
We haven't separated them out. We're in the process of taking that survey and separating those items out. That is something that we will have together over the next few months in advance of that next year's submission. So I should be able to kind of put those together. And I believe when we were putting this together in the overall sheet per component, I think we color-coded them. So it should be identifiable for me to be able to pull that general number out, total of what life safety is probably going to be. Now, life safety is interesting because there's A, B's, and C items that we usually identify in how versed we are in life safety. Everybody, I guess, we've all lived it at least once, right? Okay,
why don't you give a little update what life safety is?
Since I'm fire hosing, I'm gonna keep it going, guys. So from a life safety perspective, when you do your 10-year inspection, what we do, we look at your buildings and we analyze all the code issues and in life that are items that are safety issues and items that are code issues. They're ranked, and the reason I say I separate them is if it's ranked A, those are really the safety issues that you're gonna have to tackle within a year or two. If it's ranked B, it's 3 to 5 years. If it's ranked C, it's 5 to 10. Now, A is the things you have to do, B is the things that you should do, and C is like you could do, right? So A are the ones that we'll identify that are saying, oh, those are safety concerns. It's usually the trip hazards, it's cracking of floors, it's ADA accessibility, that's an issue that we want to get to. Those are the things that you should do. The code ones are the things that you could do that we do as B. When we look at code ones, those are looking at easy ones are wired glass in your classrooms. Everyone 10, 15 years ago was putting wired glass everywhere because it was a fire rating that separated classrooms from corridors. Everyone did it. That was the thing to do. Then guess what? The code changes and it says, now don't do it, so they take it back. So that's a code issue. But I don't look at that as a big safety issue unless there's large expanses of it. So those qualify in the B, and those are less concerning. When it comes to C's, the ones that you could do, those are open for discussion that we look at and say, they'd be nice to do, but if you can do them, we identify them to alert you of them. So once we identify all those, we look at the A, B's, and C's, and then we say, what do we want to send downstate? What can we send downstate? We send those downstate for review. ISB looks at those and they kind of review them and say, okay, we agree with all these components, we agree with these violations, and the minute they accept it, that tells you that you have the timeline, the clock starts that you have to do them. And people always wonder, if these buildings are 60, 70 years old, how is there items that are coming up every 10 years? A lot of these things are B items that are the could-dos that slowly become should-dos. Or if there's always something that age kind of causes the safety concern to happen, right? So that's why we always try to address those in every 10 years. Does that make sense?
But A, B, and C could be in this number.
Correct.
Well, that's going to be important when we later on talk about money and levy and life safety. Another component we got to think about if we make these buildings energy efficient. You talk about single pane windows. It sounds like we would be saving money on energy.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be significant because of how big the buildings are.
It also makes your systems work a lot less harder.
Right.
So not only, it's energy efficient, but at the same time, they're not trying to keep that temperature at that level. So energy lighting, energy bills go down from a lighting perspective. You switch into LED. Mechanical systems, the equipment you're replacing with are much more energy efficient than they were, so that keeps costs down. Keep your building sealed, makes it even easier to work on. So yes, as you put them all together, it helps keep those costs down quite a bit. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Moving on?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, pass the baton to PMA. Let's talk money.
Going the wrong way? Oh, no. All right, well, thank you guys for having us. I am Tim Flaherty. I am with PMA's Investment Services Group, and with me is Tammy Beckwith-Shalmo, who is the Senior Vice President, Managing Director of our Public Finance Group. And George just went through all of the potential projects you guys have ahead of you, and what we want to do is talk about how can the district fund these projects, right, for the ones you choose to take on. So when we look at the different options to fund capital projects, we look at it as different tools for your toolkit, right? So I'm going to start by going over some of the non-borrowing options, and then Tammy's going to go into more detail on the borrowing options for the district. So to start, we've already kind of talked about some of the capital needs that you guys have been funding through your annual operating budget, right? Just the routine maintenance that needs to get done. That's one source of it. But then another source is looking at your fund balance. And we want to determine how much of your fund balance can you safely contribute to these projects. So we're going to start with that. And on this page of the presentation, just kind of wanted to go over the fund balance as a high level. So the board has an objective to keep that fund balance above 51% at the end of the year. So that would be a snapshot in time on June 30th of what your fund balance is. And what we can see based off of our cash flow analysis, on June 30th, we would assume that would be around 53%. So still above your objective, right above that 51%. But we know that fund balance is not consistent throughout the year, right? You're going to receive large chunks of your revenue at certain times and then spend down the remainder of the year. So when we look at it, we want to identify what is your low point, right? We know 53% is what's going to be showing on your audited financials for the year end. But when we look forward, your low point in a typical year, what it should be, is going to be actually right now, right before Cook County starts distributing taxes. So you guys received a little bit this week. Mm-hmm. So your low point gets down to about 38%. So that's a 15% swing from what you see at the end of the year compared to during the year. So anytime we're considering spending down permanently your fund balance, we want to take that into account because that 15%, that equates to about 54 days of cash on hand. So if you are going to consider spending down, it just has to be part of the equation to know that. And then to complicate matters further, Cook County is involved too. So in the normal year, Cook County for 15 straight years had their due dates for property taxes on August 1st and March 1st. And what that means for the school district is that you start receiving your revenue a couple days or a couple weeks before that due date. So you would typically start receiving funds for the fall distribution in July and for the spring distribution in February, so this week. But starting in 2021, there started to be delays. So Cook County went in 2021, instead of August 1st, those due dates were October 1st, which means the district started receiving property taxes 2 months later. In 2022, that due date went to December 29th, and then the following year went to December 1st. So the number of months doesn't sound significant, but when you receive about 90% of your revenue for operating funds comes from property taxes or local sources. So that it's a very significant shift of your revenue throughout the year. So instead of getting 45% of your revenue in August, that shifts to December, which really has a big impact on your fund balance, which we try to illustrate here. So this would be looking at a typical year. At the end of November, we would expect your fund balance to be close to 63%. Assuming, right, you had already received revenue, that would be about 230 days of cash on hand. But what we saw in 2022 and 2023, your fund balance at the end of November, before taxes started coming in, got down to 22%, right? Which is still, it's not, you guys were not a district that had to be concerned about issuing TAWs, right? But for a lot of Cook County districts, it did come to that where they had to borrow short-term because they weren't receiving their revenue. But this shift of 41% of your revenue being delayed is very significant, and I think when we're considering the scope of the projects that you have, it needs to be considered that this event that we once considered hypothetical, right, is, oh, what happens if Cook County doesn't collect taxes on time? Now we have to view it as a reality because that did happen for 3 consecutive years where it was delayed. So when we're looking, if you were to consider permanently spending down some of your fund balance, we would want to take this into the equation too, knowing that anything you spend down could potentially bring that 22% lower, right? And that 22% is about equal to 80 days of cash on hand, which you wouldn't want to get too much below that. When we're looking at our cash flow analysis and seeing, okay, how much of these potential projects can you fund, we would recommend around $20 million, $15 to $20 million could be contributed in addition to what already is being budgeted in one particular year, right? So that would bring your fund balance down slightly, but you would still have enough to weather a storm like we've seen from 2021 to 2023. Obviously, $20 million is not $800 million. So that's where I'm going to pass it over to Tammy, and she's going to talk about some of the options that you have in your toolkit to look at borrowing as well. Yeah.
I know what it means, but TAW?
Sorry, yes, TAW is tax anticipation warrants. So that's a tool that school districts have available to them if they have cash concerns, right? If your fund balance is going to go below zero, it's a tool that they have, school districts have, to borrow short term with the anticipation when you receive your property taxes, you're pledging to pay those back. Good question, thank you.
All right, thanks for letting me join you tonight as well. Again, I'm Tammy Beckwith-Shalmo from PMA, and I've had the pleasure of working with the districts as its municipal advisor in the issuance of municipal bonds for many years. And before I get into the other parts of the toolkit as it relates to borrowing, I just wanted to start and give some context about how school districts actually borrow money for capital projects. So whether you're borrowing $5 million, $100 million, $500 million, you as a school district under statute just can't go to a bank and say, hey bank, can you loan this to me? You issue what are called municipal bonds. The municipal bond market in the United States is a $4 trillion market. It's significant, so when you're selling bonds, you're trying to reach as many investors as possible to get that lowest interest rate as possible. So that's how school districts across the country, particularly here in Illinois, fund capital projects. So when you issue municipal bonds and investors buy those, you are making a promise to pay principal and interest over the term of that financing. We call that debt service, and there's a fixed maturity schedule for the life of that transaction, whatever that may be. And depending on the type of financing you're entering into, most municipal bonds that are authorized for school districts in Illinois have a maturity schedule anywhere from 1 to 30 years. And The types of debt mostly that your district has issued in the past are the type where you are extending property taxes. You are putting into place a bond and interest levy every single year as part of the levy that you adopt as a board annually in December. So that bond and interest levy is what you collect from taxpayers to make those annual debt service payments on the bonds that you have sold before. You sell tax-exempt bonds. So what that means is when you're selling bonds for capital projects, they are federally tax exempt. So investors who buy your bonds don't have to pay federal income taxes on their interest income in that investment. You like that because the interest rate on a tax exempt bond is going to be less than a taxable bond. So as much as we can, we sell bonds on a tax exempt basis for capital projects if we're a school district. Okay, so let's first just talk about what statute says you can borrow. So every school district in the state of Illinois is subject to a statutory debt capacity formula. As a high school district, what you do is take your current equalized assessed value, or your EAV, and for you, that number's almost $11.5 billion. We multiply that times 6.9%, and we've subtract from that the amount of existing principal that you have on debt at this time. You are a very low debt burden school district. Districts of your size, I would say on average, have significantly more debt on hand than you do. So you have a significant amount of debt capacity. It's over $776 million. So that's what the law says. For various purposes, you can issue debt in principal only, doesn't include the interest, that amount. Now that $776 million number is not static. It changes from year to year. As your EAV grows and as you pay down more principal annually, it gets bigger over time, okay? And now, there are some exceptions to this number in terms of what counts against it. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. But this is a good back pocket number for you as a board to know. Another thing to think about, so when I mentioned that you sell tax-exempt bonds, the federal government doesn't necessarily love it that you do that because they are losing out on revenue, right? If you sold taxable bonds, they're going to get some earnings from that. So what they say is if you're going to sell tax-exempt bonds, District 214, we expect you, when you sell those bonds, you get those proceeds and you're going to use them for projects, you have to satisfy some reasonable expectation tests. And there are two main components of that. One is that you have a reasonable expectation to spend or contractually obligate yourself to spend at least 5% of those proceeds within 6 months. And that's usually a pretty easy target to hit because you can count things like professional services fees, architect's fees, for example. The other really important test is that expectation on a reasonable basis to spend at least 85% of the proceeds within 3 years. It's a reasonable expectation test. So again, things can come up. You can sell your bonds and you look at your construction draw schedule and you say, yep, we can spend at least 85%. But what can happen over those 3 years? Things like a pandemic that caused supply chain issues, things that slowed down, right? Or there are other issues with getting steel in this country. Whatever it might be, that's why it's a reasonable expectation test, because things can be out of your control during your construction project. But this is something important to keep in mind, particularly as you've sort of alluded to it in some of the discussion, big project scope. You're never going to likely sell the bonds for everything you need to do all at once, simply because you can't get all the work done necessarily and satisfy both of those reasonable expectations for every single bond issue. Okay, so let's start to go into detail about the tools and the toolkit from a borrowing standpoint. So there's a concept called the debt service extension base, or the DSEB as we call it for short. So what that means is, as a tax cap school district, which you are, back in levy year 1994, there was a law put into place in the state that said, tax cap school district, whatever your debt service payment was in that year for non-referendum bonds, that establishes a DSEB going forward. So when that happened in 1994, it said, okay, if you want to sell more bonds in the future on a non-referendum basis, you can do so as long as you don't, at that time, have longer than a 20-year maturity. With a law change this past summer, it now can go out as long as 30 years. But the annual debt service payment cannot be more than what your DSEB was when it was established. Whoops. So for you, it's that second line from the bottom. When it was enacted in 1994, the original DSEB of the district was just over $2.9 million. So again, that meant you could, starting in 1994 going forward, sell non-referendum bonds as long as your annual debt service payment for all non-referendum bonds was not more than $2.9 million. Then there was another law that was enacted in 2009, and since that point going forward, your DSEB increases annually by the Consumer Price Index, the CPI. So your DSEB now, as of levy year 25, because we know what the CPI is for 2025, is now $4.2 million. So what that means is the borrowing power of the district has been increasing over time on a non-referendum basis, and it will continue to do so into the future. And there are certain types of non-referendum bonds that you can sell. One of them is called a working cash bond issue. The district has experience issuing working cash bonds for capital projects. And again, it factors in this statutory formula. So we've got the $776 million point-in-time calculation. This is the one that we look at under the law. What could you sell for working cash bond purposes, for capital projects? It factors in your EAV again. It factors in some other things like the amount of evidence-based funding you receive, corporate personal property replacement tax. When we factor everything into the formula, it spits out the number that's shaded in light green at the bottom of about $336 million. So also a significantly high number. So that's another good sort of back pocket number for you as a board to know. However, just because that formula says you could sell $336 million on a working cash basis, that doesn't mean that would fit within your DSEB, right? So what we've done here is we've said, let's assume, just for illustrative purposes, so you could start to get an idea of what tool, this particular tool, could generate on a non-referendum basis for projects. We've got it in kind of two sections here. So kind of right in the middle, you'll see there's a lighter blue rectangle going across. It says maximum proceeds based on $3.9 million levy. So what that means is your payment right now as a district for non-referendum bonds, your annual debt service payment is right around $3.95 million. So what we're saying here on that side of the chart is if we did a working cash bond issue over 10, 20, or 30 years at current rates, what would be the maximum amount of proceeds we could generate for projects? So if we look for the 10-year, it would be about $25.7 million. The 20-year scenario is about $45.3 million. And over a 30-year payback, it's about $55.5 million. The right-hand side, where it says maximum proceeds DSEB capacity assumes 2% annual growth, what that means is we are increasing that debt service payment from the $3.95 million by 2% per year. So we're assuming that that DSEB is going to increase over time by 2%, because we're saying, well, that's what we'll estimate comfortably CPI might be each year into the future. And just so we all have some context, the average has been about 2.5% for the last 20 years and even longer. So 2% for us is a comfortable assumption. So if you look at that side, if we assume those debt service payments grow essentially by 2% per year, you can see how the amount of estimated proceeds increase. So 10 years, it's about $32.2 million versus almost $25.8 if we keep it flat. Correspondingly, over 20 years, it'd be about $61.5 million versus $45.3. And the 30-year scenario is about $79.6 million versus $55.5 million. Yeah.
I thought a couple slides ago that you said the DSEB.
Sorry. I thought the D7 dollar amount was different in that original slide. Was that 4.2?
That's correct, yes, that's what it is as of right now. But we wanted to start on the left side based on what your current debt service payment is. because that's the level that you have. So we were being a little more conservative to say, what if the board
So
said?
just a conservative
let's-
amount,
Yeah,
like 300,000 difference.
right.
Okay.
Let's keep it flat,
I'm
just
good.
for conversation starter.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So let's shift gears to life safety bonds. There's been a lot of conversation about life safety. So another interesting detail is one of the law changes this past summer in Springfield was taking life safety bonds out of the DSEB. So before, this past summer, if you were going to sell life safety bonds, they would have to fit within that DSEB limit. So we would count, prior to this law, if you're going to sell them as life safety, they'd also be, those numbers I just listed, fit within those buckets as a maximum proceeds that you could generate in the current interest rate environment. But now, you can issue life safety bonds without a referendum. You can pay them back as long as 30 years if you want to, and that annual debt service payment can be whatever you as a board want it to be. They, of course, count against the debt limit, that $776 million debt capacity we revisited a couple minutes ago. They don't require any sort of petition period process. Working cash bonds actually do require a 30-day petition process where the board would adopt a resolution to start the process to sell working cash bonds, and it starts a 30-day clock shortly thereafter. And if during the 30-day window, at least 10% of the registered voters sign and submit a petition to the board, the public can stop the sale of working cash bonds. The public cannot stop the sale of life safety bonds if you have the directive through the approved amendments that George talked about from ISB. You do have to hold a Bond Issue Notification Act hearing or a BINA hearing, which functions much like the type of hearing you have annually for your budget or your tax levy. You give the public the opportunity to provide testimony. Very important detail, though, is you cannot issue life safety bonds unless you have the approvals from ISB. And George talked about that 10-year life safety survey coming up for you in 2026. So you go through that process, and then specific amendments are filed against the survey. And as you get the approved amendments, then you have the authority to actually issue life safety bonds against that survey. We wanted just to show you for illustrative purposes, because as George said, we don't have the breakdown yet of how much of the red dots and maybe some of the yellow dots are in terms of the total life safety scope. But just to give you a point of reference, for every $5 million of bonds you would issue on a life safety basis, and if you pay it back over 10 years, that annual debt service payment would be about $613,000. And for the median value home within your district of almost $400,000, that's about a $6 increase on the property tax bill. Now, we chose a 10-year payback because it's a 10-year life safety survey. So since this law changed, school districts and tax cap counties are working pretty quickly to issue life safety bonds. They're going through the process, and a lot of them are picking a 10-year payback for that reason, because now they can be really diligent about, updating that survey every 10 years and actually doing work. And every 10 years, then they plan to sell debt. As the old survey drops off and here's a new one, we'll just keep up issuing life safety bonds. Okay, so referendum bonds. One other component of the law change, and it's mentioned in that blue call-out box here at the bottom, is effective with the election cycle this past November. If you pass a referendum for building bond purposes, whatever that amount is listed on that ballot question does not count against your statutory debt limit anymore. So if you passed a referendum for $800 million, you issue those bonds, and as long as you hold a public hearing specifically for that purpose before the bonds are sold, you would preserve the $776 million of debt capacity for other borrowing purposes, whether it be working cash bonds, life safety bonds, or something else. So this is a significant change, because what was happening is school districts all over the state would have borrowing needs that exceeded the amount of their debt capacity. So what they would have to do is go to the General Assembly with every election cycle and ask for permission with special legislation to get a debt capacity exception, and then the governor would have to sign it. And in every case, it would go through. General Assembly would approve it, governor would sign it, but now it's taken that step away. You don't have to go through all that anymore, but you do have to have a hearing. Another thing to be mindful of is if you pass a referendum, you have 5 years to issue the full amount of the referendum authority. So that's important, as some of the comments George made earlier about scope of work, how much you can get done every single year. The good news is you have 5 years to sell all the bonds, but you have to be mindful of that when you're putting something on the ballot, of course. Now, we again wanted to show you, just for some illustrative purposes today, we used $400, $600, and $800 million referendum amounts. And in these examples, we assumed, again, to be conservative, you would sell all of the bonds at once. Highly unlikely that you would do that, but to be conservative. So let's start on the left side, kind of the rectangular, that's the $400 million proceed amount, the lightest of the green. So we showed you the numbers over 20, 25, and 30-year paybacks. And you can see, if we go to the bottom 2 rows, what you can see for each scenario is what's the estimated increase in the bond and interest, that's what B&I stands for, that bond and interest tax rate. It would be just under 21 cents for a 20-year referendum for $400 million. For 25 years, it would be 18 cents, and for 30 years, it'd be almost 17 cents. And then right below it, you can see the estimated impact on a tax bill for the median home value within the district. Just to give you some context, the current B&I tax rate is about 3.5 cents in the district. So that median home value right now is paying about $38 on their tax bill from last year's levy. If we look in the middle, the same information is provided for the $600 million referendum. Again, you can see the estimated tax rate increase and the impact on the tax bill for each one. And then we did the same thing for the $800 million referendum. Everybody follow that? Sorry, the numbers are really small up here, but okay. So as we've talked about, you have various tools in your toolkit, whether it's fund balance, working cash bonds against your DSEB, life safety bonds, or referendum bonds. You could do a combination of these things. You could put them at different points in the cycle of the projects. You might step back and say, once George has been able to do the 10-year life safety survey and you have a handle on what that scope is, you might say, well, we're going to do some life safety bonds first, and then we're going to contemplate maybe working cash bonds, and then maybe a referendum, or shift that order altogether. But it's not, of course, an all or none. It can be a combination of any of these things to help you take care of some of your projects. I will not redo our disclosure language. You're welcome. But what questions do you have?
Again, a fire hose. Board members, questions?
Oh, my God, so many.
Go ahead.
Yes, you mentioned what the tax bill was per house of what value and whatever that tax rate was. You give that to me again, please.
Sure. So the median home value in the district is $396,000.
Okay.
So in levy year 2023,
Yep.
that median home value would have paid $38 toward principal and interest or debt service on the district's bonds.
For debt service. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Board members.
I have so many questions, Alva.
It's okay, go ahead.
Okay. So there's a lot of information, and I love to understand how things work. I'm not sure I'm going to get there tonight. So the first thing I had was, it's sort of an overarching thing. We're not 100% certain what we're going to do in what order, because we don't know what we have to tackle. So if we don't know, and every year, the district, courtesy of our crack team, figures out what we're going to tackle within our budget, and we have a plan for that, and we have some capital projects we just tackle regularly, right? So in my mind, you have to understand sort of first what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and then time how your money comes in, and each bucket that you can get money from has different rules associated with it. Is there software that helps with this, or, because there's so many variables, right? I mean, I'm trying to build sort of an Excel spreadsheet in my mind that has it all going, and the if statements are out of control. So how do you do that? How do you put that together and say, this is what we're going to do in the first 10 years, assuming the knowledge we have today, right? And nothing extra happens, et cetera. And what we need to pay, and over time, figuring out where you're going to get to, like what is the end date on all that work that needs to be done?
Well, I'll start with the end of your statement. There is no end date
Okay,
to
that makes sense to me.
our work with our buildings. We have to commit to that project list that I talked about of like the life cycle replacement cycle of all
Absolutely.
things. Like, we have to commit and be prepared. I don't know if you have a number in your head. We have to probably think $20 million a year forever in terms of maintaining 7 high schools.
Sure, that's 20 million of today's dollars.
Of today's dollars.
Right.
But we have a $350 million budget that's going to grow. 20 million of today's dollars that also grows as our budget grows, to commit to constant refreshing and the preventative maintenance that Anetta's team works on, so that we don't find ourselves in a hole again. And I think what we have to do to get to your question is beyond this finance portion. The next session of our evening is that discussion point of really beginning our values conversation. It's the beginning our values conversation of how much of that pie do we want to start committing to. Nothing that you do tonight is finite. Nothing is final. Nothing is binding at all. We're not saying we're going to which financing option we're committing to. That's not what's happening tonight. Tonight is about education, and is about a discussion so that you all can begin having, you're now armed with the same information that we have, and we can have a meaningful conversation as a team about where do we want to go, and how much of this do you think, we're not going to hold you to any of it, but how much do you think you want to advise us and charge us with beginning to tackle?
Okay, so sort of a follow-up to that, when I saw the dots and the presentation, and we've seen a lot of it before and over time, but is there a place where we could like see the deep dive of what's in each of those categories, et cetera? Or who does that? Who does that? Is that Mr. Yulee? Is that?
All of the information and data in the first 6 slides is roughly coming from 10,000 pages. I mean, I brought that book.
Right, I remember that.
It's all in there.
Yes.
So it's just a matter of how far do we want to go, and what additional information do you need?
You're welcome to all of it if you want to dig in.
Well, I really appreciate that, and, I could stand on it and be maybe average height then, but one of my, I guess, Chris, my question then is, are you charged? Is that part of your responsibility with knowing what's in that book and having sort of being able to answer the value propositions? Are you the district's representative on that? Are you an Anetta? I mean,
And fiscal. It's a multi-department project.
Okay, so then we wind up with recommendations of what to do, how to do it, when to do it, right, over time.
I mean, we're operating off of, as we try and chip away at the beginning stages of this,
Yes.
we're operating off of, Chris has a recommended action. And actually, in March, we'll be here, we're now on that cycle of 18 months ahead, so that we can get your approval for the scope of work, so we can be the first out the door to get bids and get the very best prices. We did it this year, for this coming summer.
Right.
And I want to say we saved over $1 million in comparison in terms of scope of project, because we're first out out of the gate.
Well, and that also enables us to do some of those planning things like closing down a hallway and
Well, because what was
rerouting.
happening at Hersey right now, we are actively underway and walls are up in the Hersey Student Services Center because they were able to
Right.
begin early. Not all of our projects will afford that, but being out early allows the construction management people and the bidders, they give the best possible price because we're giving them so much advance notice that they can bank that they're going to have the work. It's a huge advantage for us, and that was a major shift.
Okay, so, yeah.
Do you mind if I add something to this mix real quick? I know it's not my turn, my questions are over, and I feel bad. And I was only supposed to talk for 20 minutes, and I think I was an hour, so I apologize. So since last year, I know okay, what have we been doing since last year? And part of those discussions internally with staff has been to look at that big book, start helping, initially prioritizing types of items that are screaming louder than others to help try to map out a 10-year plan. And as many times I probably did 30 different iterations of saying, hey, if we spent this many a year, here's what we can get done, and what should go here, what should go forward. We've been analyzing those, but without a clear indication of what maybe a true sense of those dollars available we have, it's a guessing game that I just keep circling and circling. So I think part of, we'll never get 800, right? But I think part of the goal at the end of this, or at the end of wherever we collectively come to, is if we understand the amount of money we can take on, will help better inform how we can help work with staff to prioritize the types of things that need to happen over 10 years. Does that help? It's like a chicken and egg kind of thing. Right now, we've been using as a staple of $30 million a year based on feasibility of what can happen at all sites. Like if you start going too much, is it getting too much in a given year? But every time we've iterated it and looked at it, some years have been 40 or 50, some years have been 20. We need a little more direction to see what we can spend to know how to help prioritize those items.
So when you look at each of those items, do you do some sort of scorecard analysis on what those items are about? Like, this is building failure, it's gonna score higher on a safety perspective. This is, I mean, does each item to get you to red, yellow, green?
Yes, but the no-brainer ones are really the mechanical and roofing side of things. Those are easily telling me what age and vintage they are. And when we looked at that list, it was my first in prioritization, what can we tackle? If you tackled all the mechanical, that might eat up all your dollars, right? So it was anything pre-2000. So anything 25 years and older made the cut on mechanical. Anything that's within that 25 years, we said, okay, maybe not. Roofing, same thing. Anything that is well beyond their life is on that list. And then we start prioritizing strictly from age on those. Those were clear. Then it became, now let's start peppering other pieces. We're looking at fields that are being issues right now that have, those turf fields that have been really aged, those rose to the top. So there were some pieces, BAS, fire alarm, there's certain components that were clear-cut ones. And once we spread those out, that gave us a dollar amount. Then it was how do we pepper other types of projects in there? And right now, as we play that game and try to understand what we can, I think it's important to understand what funding we have available to be able to play that game and come back to you with a much more directed approach of here's the types of things that we've identified as priorities based on the budget that's available. So it is, you're right, there are a lot of question marks that have to go forward on this runway. The smart decision you guys have done is you've had Chris and his team put together a 3-year plan of 24, 25, 26 of the types of things that buys us that time to figure that component out and come back to you without rushing through something like this, of being very thoughtful and intentional of coming back with a priority list with a budget. Does that help at all? I hope.
Yeah, it does, it does. I have more financing type questions then. So would most districts do a mix of all types of financing?
It depends on what the scope of the project is. I would say in the types of projects you're talking about, infrastructure, life safety, a combination approach is very common.
So is going out to referendum, that literally means you put it on a vote?
Yes.
And the public then has the ability to vote yes or no, right? And it's one of those votes that's phrased as a yes or no question,
Correct,
and then people vote yes or no.
correct, yep.
And so if we did all of this, I guess I'm trying to get I'm own a house in district. Like, what does the tax bill look like if over 30 years you did all of this? What are my tax bill differentiations? Because there were components to each of them, right?
If you go back, Tammy might cycle back.
There we go, I was going the wrong way, sorry.
There you go.
Yeah. So let's start with the biggest number, if you want. So on the right-hand side, 800 million.
Yes.
So if we're paying it back over 20 years for that median home value of almost $400,000, it would be a $475 increase in the tax bill. Is that what you're asking?
Okay, so I didn't understand when we were going through this slide, and I apologize. I guess I didn't understand that was an amalgamation of all the different chip away pieces.
Well, right. It was just to give you a benchmark. We chose 400, 600, and 800 just to give you some idea, right? So that wasn't meant to be that if you do the 800 million, you do everything that's on Georgia's list, right? It's just to give you a benchmark. So then you can see over 600 and 400 million, what that looks like with different maturity schedules. And the reason we showed you 20, 25, and 30 years is because there's trade-offs that you as a board have to think about if you get to that point, right? If you spread it over a longer term, the annual impact on the taxpayer is less, but your interest cost over time is larger with a longer payback. So that's down the road, as Dr. Rowe was saying. Those are the types of detailed discussions you get into about, well, what is the best way to finance these projects?
I think the other aspect of this is how much work can we get done in the limited amount of time,
Right.
if that was the route you chose to
We couldn't
go.
pull 800 in
I don't
next
see it
year and
being
then spend
possible
it
to
within
complete that
the
work.
statutory timeframes.
right,
It
not
just-
possible.
Yeah, it just doesn't happen.
When
that
we only
way.
have summers to work on. Yep.
Right.
Bill?
George, thank you very much. I appreciate your chicken and the egg type thing that you said before. Hopefully it's not eggs at the price here. But at any rate, what we're looking at is, I wouldn't know how to address it unless you gave us some scenarios. I mean, maybe they know how to address it, but unless you give us some scenarios and we can hook some, or you can hook some dollars with that, that's going to give us an indication, what we're going to do on the finance end. For us to go on the finance end and tell you that here's what we're going to do. We're going to come up with $41.6 million next year, and what can we do? We can change light switches, we can drain the pool twice, we could, whatever. Give us some scenarios so that we can put some dollars with it, so we can look at it and say, yeah, okay, over the next 3 years, next 2 years, these looks like the projects we're going to do, because a lot of them are in the red, some are in the yellow, whatever it is, and it also gives us $5 million extra to do an emergency. That's what I want to see.
Great segue, Mr. Dustling, because that is the conversation that we need to begin having, because I think George and team can do that when we begin to commit to how much of the $865 million we think is important for us to begin to bite off.
Clairvoyance has always been one of my strengths.
Can always count on you in the clutch, Mr. Dustling. So the way I kind of envision, I don't want to take away from your finance questions. Please, we should continue those. I want you to walk away tonight feeling as good as possible about what options lay in front of us. But I say that's possible. I know it's a lot. But when we think about the scope of the work, when we look at the totality of the master facilities assessment, how much of that do we feel is important to tackle? And then talk about what can we control in terms of our annual budget, use of fund balance. We can control life safety bond issues. We can control a certain amount of debt, and the risks that go with that of, one, we need to do our due diligence to use our finances to the greatest extent of our ability before we ask our community for help, if that's even an option you would consider. But second, we heard we had $20 million of fund balance that they believed we could safely spend and not be at risk. So that's on the table to help bridge the gap. We can control our energy efficiency efforts. That's what we're after, and we're actively working on now. We can control operating more efficiently across our departments in terms of how we run the school district, so we can ensure our resources are expended to the greatest extent possible. And then you can get into the bond issuance if you'd prefer to go that route versus asking the community for support. Then there's the question of, do we just do the facility maintenance plan? Or do you want to dream and ask the community to help us dream about what our classrooms should look like? Which is additional dollars over and above what you saw, and it may be kind of a scary thing to think about. And is it even prudent to talk about that right now, given what we have in front of us? So that's the kind of conversation that I think is appropriate for us to dig into now, of how much, based on what you've learned tonight, should we be thinking about? Of the work, not the money, the work.
More questions, board members?
Well, I have a comment.
Go ahead, Elise.
So, in 2008, my husband and I were going to move houses from house A to house B, and the market crashed. So we put an addition on, like half of Arlington Heights. And we lived very closely within a budget, and we tried to maximize every penny, and et cetera, et cetera. There are things we did not do in 2008, and they were outside of our budget, would have increased our costs, et cetera. To go back and do them now would be astronomically expensive. So I think, having learned from that, I think we should be asking the question, not just what do we need to do to keep the buildings moving and going, but to think about what would we wish in the future, if we could come back to today, what would we wish we had done in the future while we were striking while the iron was hot? So your question of asking the community what they want things to look like, et cetera. I think it's an important question to not just hold the building upside down and shake it and focus on what you're left with in your hand, but to think about how we're using spaces and what that's gonna look like 15, 20 years from now. It's just my 2 cents.
Go ahead.
It's really, again, I think just to keep it level set here, it's the capacity of what work can be done within the time allotted. It's the capacity of the appetite of the taxpayers and what the board thinks and what the staff thinks and what our partners think. I mean, that's a delicate balance, and there's probably, George, how many iterations you gonna do tonight when you get home? Another 20 or 30 probably, right? So whatever that is, it's leveling those buckets out. And there is no right or wrong answer at this point. We have to just start exploring.
Start.
Go ahead.
First, I wanted to thank all three of you, George, Tim, and Tammy, for coming tonight. It was very informative. A couple things. When George first came last year, and he had that list of some of the projects that we were looking at, and I think all that everybody talked about was that number, the $800 million. That's really was the main focus. And if you looked at most of the projects, they looked like they were more of our needs than our wants. And there is a big difference between the two. What we kind of heard tonight and saw with the reds and the yellows and the greens, we definitely have what looks like, in some areas, are a lot of needs, and some are the ones that were even with reds that look like, to me, could be more like wants. But I have a lot of faith in our administration. I have seen over the course of the last 2 years with a lot of our projects, so it could be the Buffalo Grove baseball fields that have been sparingly, and I say that, emphasize it, have been used very infrequently the last 3 years, or the Prospect Roof that's like a second pool, the Hersey thing, the Elk Grove Culinary. We have done a lot of things right in making fixes, and in doing so, we have created a lot of savings because we have been smart. Going out for bid 12 to 18 months ahead, saving on materials. We've done a lot of good things. The Village of Elk Grove giving us $750,000 for our culinary classrooms. So we've created a partnership too that also help subsidize some of these projects. So clearly, I have a lot of confidence that whatever projects we choose, and I do believe that a lot of it's going to come down to looking at specifically the red stuff, that might be, the life safety as well, focusing on what we think are the priorities, I think will be a telling sign of how much we really want to spend, just for starters, because we know those are probably the greatest needs. Now, secondly, and I want to piggyback off of what Millie said, is that when we did the strategic plan, we had a group of 50 people, some from the community, and we asked them, what do you want the portrait of the graduate to look like? And what do you want the future of our education to look like? And I think it's very important that before we, all of us here, we shouldn't be the ones that ultimately decide what we do. We really need that same group of community to partner with us and tell us what they think we need, why we need it, and make sure that if we do have to choose something as a referendum, that we do have some buy-in and they do understand why we do need that money. I think we could do a much better job as a district, and I talked with Chris about this earlier today, is we have done a really good job with managing our money. And the 7 of us that are sitting here, we're all the financial stewards of the purse. And the fact that we have done a good job with a lot of savings from these projects, the other things that we have done, certainly should demonstrate and basically get some credibility from our stakeholders that we are doing a really good job with our money. And in doing so, when we are asking for this money to do these projects, we have some credibility. We have some trust. They see that we've done a good job these last couple of years, and hopefully that will buy, something to get us, moving where if we have to do whatever funding to get this money, we'll have the stakeholders will be our partners and not our enemies. That's all I got to say. Thanks.
Board members? Well, I know this was a lot to take in tonight, and I really appreciate everyone's input into this, and thank for the presenters, like fire hose, constantly. I know we're not done yet. I know we're not done yet. When the legislature passed the life safety, and I thought this was really good, and I'd really like to see that number, because I think there would be a significant amount out of that 866 that would be life safety, that we could levy and not go to the voters for. I know that was a thing going around the state for a few years, and they finally got off their, what's to do that, because around the state, all the school buildings are aging. I mean, what do you hear of a new high school being built? I know 57's building a new junior high, but that's pretty rare around here. Scott and I were talking, and I go, HVACs and roofs aren't really sexy because the people can't see them. But you need the bones of your building, or else everything else is not worth it. I have a crack in my foundation that it's been there for a while, but I had installed ceiling lights because my place is old, and I'm still looking at the plaster that they did, and I haven't painted it yet. Now, do I want to paint first, or do I need to fix that crack in my foundation? Well, hello, I need to fix the crack in my foundation, because everything else will go to pot. It's like, choices that you have to make. I would love to sit there at night looking at a wonderfully painted ceiling, but it's got to wait. And I think these are the choices that we have to make. The public will see all the nice furniture, the great classrooms, but to me, it's the bones of the building that have to come first. Anyway, that's my take. Dr. Rowe?
Well, I think what I would hope that we could emerge from this from is, as we've begun this process, Mr. Fiorillo mentioned the strategic plan. And what has gone really well with the strategic plan is we didn't, we don't do things in a silo. We were committed to not doing things in silos, and we engaged with our community in a really, really deep way, and have built the plan that you'll see in a couple of months together with them, from their feedback to the steering committee that was really, really strong, to our staff, 50-plus staff members coming together to build some of the strategies that you'll see. What I would like to do, and I'd look for a discussion to garner some discussion support, is I'd like to engage with a partner who knows what they're doing when it comes to this type of conversation. These communication partners that can help guide. Now, this is a communication partner that could help guide down a strategic, or down a referendum, but engaging with that partner wouldn't commit us to going down a referendum, because, as Mr. Fiorillo says, I agree. Asking our community, what would you like to see? And if we did go down, ultimately, if we did go down the route of asking for help at an election for a referendum, how much of it are you willing to bite off? So that way we can walk in with confidence, and it's not something that we're doing, it's something that we're working with our community to do because it's their schools. That would be the ideal for me, is that we can walk away and begin the process of engaging with a partner, and nothing would happen before we would come back with a recommendation that you would act on to approve the spend to contract with that partner. Because, I haven't run a referendum before, if that's ultimately the route we go. I haven't tackled $800 million worth of building needs, and our team is relatively new, and this district has prided itself on 50-plus years of not asking the public for financial support. And if ultimately that's the route we must go, and you approve, I'd rather have an expert at our side.
So this isn't a vote.
It's not a
vote. Anyone have any comments about Scott moving forward with looking at a partner to do this communication?
I have a
Go ahead.
question.
No, go ahead, Andrea.
What does the cost look like for engaging with a partner?
Well, Mr. Maggi's done some research, and it can range from simple polling costs to getting like that steering committee style group together and running a more comprehensive thing. Polling costs could range anywhere from $15,000 to do a pretty comprehensive poll to the upward $25,000 or $30,000 for a larger, more significant poll. If we're going to engage and we go down the route of a referendum, I believe the cost is anywhere from $60,000 to $100,000 to see it through to the end, which is what some of our neighboring districts have paid with those partners to guide that.
And so that's based on the task, not necessarily the time involved.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Millie?
So that partner that you're talking about is purely for gauging the question of should we referendum, or if so, to guide us through the process?
Yes and no. There are varying levels that we can engage with people. We can go with a polling company to build it ourselves and ask the community, or we can go with a partner that could do that or see it all the way through if we chose to engage with them at that level. So we've got a number of options. That's why I'm not asking you to commit to anything tonight, because we want to really explore what we think our needs are, and we'd come back with a recommendation for you to act on.
So it kind of comes up into that timing of what we're going to do and component plans, right?
Yes, but what we can control is we have a plan for summer of '26, which is what we'll be back next month asking for. And I can tell you now that will range from financially what we can control within our budget to accomplishing what we'd like to, which would dip into fund balance in year one. And I think regardless of what we do, fund balance has got to be on the table for us to begin doing our projects. Because if we get to the point where we do ask the community, we have to have taken care of everything we can control before we ask them to help us with more.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I want to keep us progressing on what we've been doing a great job the last few years of chipping off big projects, right? And so we got to keep that train on the track.
We've been of the mindset that the master facilities plan would not begin officially until summer of '27, if not summer of '28. So we're chipping away, but we would be ready with a 10-year plan at that point. So we do still have time. We're not rushed. We're not rushed.
And Dr. Rowe, from a communications perspective, the district does have a history of seeking public opinion. In 0304, there was a poll conducted by an outside firm, the sample size and the validity, and then again in 1314. A poll was done by the same, I believe the same firm.
And we can tackle a number of different topics with this poll. It doesn't have to just be this. Mr. Maggie and I have been talking about a website refresh. We've been talking communication style. We're hearing from families that they prefer a text message notifying them of an email or a text message communication. That's not
It gauges where people get their information.
practice because we were typically an email. So we can update our communication preferences with our families and give them what they want at the same
The
time.
community, yeah.
And the entire community.
So you mentioned possibly drawing down some of the fund balance. Would also revisiting the sale of that property also be included in that?
Certainly.
I mean, because that's money that we could certainly use to.
We can
some
revisit
of the
that
projects.
whenever you all are ready to.
Okay, thank you.
We do have, we did do some research, because if that's a property we're going to keep and sit on, we researched, it's about $400,000 to take the building down to flat land. So we're prepared to bring that back whenever you all are ready for a discussion on that.
I guess I'd make a couple comments. When you look at every business that we have, whether it's the school district where we work on a regular basis, there's limited resources, right? The resources that, we have with the buildings and grounds and all this, we've added to that. I know you're a great communicator, you got a great staff behind you, but this is so important that everybody understands what it is, and it's not one person's opinion or one viewpoint going out into the neighborhoods, right, into the community. I look at what we've done when we searched for a superintendent. We reached out to the community, right? We knew exactly the person we needed to hire when we hired you. We looked at the strategic thing that, Frank and you guys are working on. That's all community involvement, so I would question whether we have the internal bandwidth to do that, or do we have to go outside in order to get the right frame of mind, whether it's, 30 million, 300 million? Do we have the right steps in place, and do we have the resources to do that the right way? It proves in the past that a professional coming in, embellishes it and fortifies what we're trying to do, so I think we should
And I think there's
explore it.
the scientific side of it too, because when you're polling, it's a science. And when we're surveying, people are telling us what they think, whether there's from the way the questions are written, that's not our expertise. Let's bring an expert in to guide us. But it's a science, polling science, and we don't want to get it wrong. Yeah, Mr. Dusslin?
I'd be most interested in talking to whoever or whatever the groups are that are possibly going to do this. I want to find out what questions they're going to start to ask.
Definitely.
I'd like to know it in a kind of a 3, 4, 5, 6 part, whatever they set up. Where do you start asking questions? Do you go out and ask first, you want a referendum? No. But then if you go out and ask, what is it, what do you like about schools? Here are the things we've got. Here are the things we've got. You'll recognize that Prospect is 65 years old. And there's a way to, obviously, and they understand how to do that. People listen to the visiting firemen when they come in. So, and that's what this person will be. And they're experts at the thing, so. But I want to hear what kind of question, how they going to set their questions up? What series of questions?
Totally agree. And I think when we get to that point, we will bring them here to have them share directly with you what the plans would be. So you can engage with them yourselves. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. I think I can. Excuse me. Do we, can I have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Call the roll before Alva dies.
Palmer. Palmer? Aye. Heineman?
Aye.
Dessling.
Oh, yeah.
Fiorito.
Yes.
Rauch. Walker.
Yes.
And Kreutzer.
Aye. Thank you all for the great discussion, really appreciate it.